I used to think that the sound of a heartbreaking was loud. I imagined it like a vase shattering on a marble floor, a sudden, violent crash that makes everyone stop and look. But I was wrong. Watching Eleanor that night, I learned that a heart breaks in absolute silence. It is the sound of a clock ticking in a hallway that is too large for one person. It is the sound of a silver fork touching a porcelain plate that has gone cold. It is the sound of a heavy velvet curtain being drawn against a window, shutting out the world. I held the piece of paper in my hand, the edges sharp against my thumb. The ink was barely dry. It wasn't a long note. Eleanor was never a woman who wasted words on people who wouldn't listen, but the weight of that single sheet of paper felt heavier than the entire estate she was leaving behind. I looked out the window at the driveway. It was empty, buried under a pristine blanket of fresh snow, undisturbed by tires or footprints. They hadn't come. Not for the dinner, not for the gifts, not for her. And now, staring at her handwriting, I realized that the woman I had cared for over the last 3 years hadn't just died of old age or a failing heart. She had died of a realization. She had waited until the grandfather clock in the foyer chimed 12 times, signaling that Christmas was over, and then she had decided that her role as a mother was over too. The house is quiet now, in that terrifying way that only a house full of secrets can be. The police have come and gone. The doctor has signed the certificate, and soon they will be here. The children, the 3 pillars of success, the golden trio that Eleanor spoke of with a shine in her eyes for decades. David, the investment banker in Chicago, Clara, the fashion editor in New York, and Michael, the youngest, the visionary tech entrepreneur in San Francisco. They are on planes right now, rushing toward this house, not because they sensed their mother's pain, but because the lawyer called them. They are coming for the assets, for the vintage jewelry, for the property value. They don't know about the note. They don't know that at 12:01 a.m. everything changed. They think they are coming to mourn a tragedy, but they are actually walking into a judgment. I folded the paper and slipped it into the pocket of my uniform. It burned against my side like a brand. I wasn't just the caregiver anymore. I was the witness. And when they walked through those double oak doors, expecting their inheritance, I would be the one to serve them the truth. To understand why this note destroys everything, you have to understand the morning of December 24th. It didn't start with tragedy. It started with a smell that I will never forget: roasted chestnuts, sage, and the expensive, dusty perfume of old money. Eleanor had been awake since 4 in the morning. When I came downstairs, rubbing the sleep from my eyes, she was already in the kitchen. She wasn't supposed to be standing for that long. Her ankles were swollen, and her breath came in shallow rattles that worried me constantly. But that day, she moved with a manic energy that defied her 82 years. She was wearing her best dress, a deep emerald silk that she hadn't worn since her husband Arthur passed away 10 years ago. Her silver hair was pinned up perfectly, held in place by a pearl comb. She looked like royalty. She looked like hope. "Sarah, look," she had said, pointing to the kitchen island. It was overflowing. There were 3 specific pies: pecan for David, pumpkin for Clara, and a complex apple rhubarb crumble that Michael used to beg for when he was 6. There was a turkey the size of a small child, brining in a pot. There were bottles of wine that cost more than my monthly rent, breathing on the counter. "They're coming this year, Sarah. I can feel it. David promised he'd try to clear his schedule. Clara said the magazine goes to print on the 23rd. And Michael sent that text last week with the heart emoji." I remember feeling a knot of anxiety tighten in my stomach. I had seen the texts. They were vague, non-committal, the kind of messages people send to keep someone on the hook without making a promise. "We'll see, Mum." "Trying my best, Mum. Crazy week. Let you know soon." But Eleanor didn't read them with my cynical eyes. She read them with a mother's desperation. She had translated "we'll see" into "we will be there." "It looks beautiful, Eleanor," I said, forcing a smile as I took the heavy mixing bowl from her trembling hands. "But you need to sit down. You need to save your energy for when they arrive." She swatted my concern away with a laugh that sounded like dry leaves rustling. "I have plenty of energy, dear. Today is important. It's the first time in 5 years that we'll all be under the same roof. I need everything to be perfect. If it's perfect, they'll stay longer. If the food is good, they won't rush off to their hotels. I want them to sleep in their old rooms. I made up the beds myself." That broke me. The image of this frail woman dragging fresh linens up the grand staircase, smoothing out the sheets for grown adults who hadn't slept in those beds since the Clinton administration. I wanted to shake her. I wanted to tell her that her children were selfish narcissists who treated her like a calendar obligation rather than a human being. But you don't say that to a woman wearing emerald silk on Christmas Eve. You just help her peel the potatoes. The house, the Blackwood Manor as the locals called it, was dressed to kill. Eleanor had insisted on the real tree, a 12-foot fir that smelled of winter and memory. We had spent 3 days decorating it. Every ornament had a story. "This one David made in 1st grade," she had told me, holding up a glued-together mess of macaroni and glitter. "He was so proud of it." She placed it front and center. "And this angel, Clara stole it from the church nativity play when she was 5 because she thought it was cold. She laughed, a genuine bubbling sound. She touched every branch with reverence, building a shrine to a family that existed only in the past." By 4:00 p.m., the house was a masterpiece. The table in the dining room was set for 4, not 5, 4. She had set a place for me in the kitchen, as per usual, but she insisted that the main table was for family time. She wanted that sacred circle. The crystal glasses sparkled under the chandelier light. The napkins were folded into swans. The fire was crackling in the hearth, casting a warm, golden glow over the mahogany furniture. Outside, the snow had started to fall, heavy and silent, turning the world white. It was the kind of Christmas setting you see in movies, the kind that promises a happy ending, but the silence was already creeping in. The house was too big. The ticking of the grandfather clock seemed to get louder with every passing minute. Tick, tock, tick, tock. At 5 p.m, the turkey was resting. The sides were in the warming oven. Eleanor sat in the high-backed armchair by the window, staring at the driveway. Her posture was rigid, expectant. Every time a car drove past on the main road, she would lean forward, her eyes lighting up, only to dim again as the sound faded into the distance. "They should be here soon," she said, her voice a little thinner than before. "The flights from the city can be delayed with this weather, and the drive from the airport takes an hour." "Did anyone send flight numbers?" I asked gently, bringing her a cup of tea she wouldn't drink. "No," she said quickly. "They wanted to surprise me with the arrival time. You know how Michael is. He loves a grand entrance." I went into the kitchen and checked my phone. I had the numbers of all her children. It was part of my job description. Emergency contacts. I stared at David's name. I debated calling him, but Eleanor had forbidden me from pestering them. "Let them come to me, Sarah. If you call, it looks like I'm begging. A mother shouldn't have to beg." So I waited. 6 p.m. came. The sun had set long ago. The darkness outside pressed against the windows. The food was at its peak perfection. The smell of the roast was now mingling with the scent of burning wood. Eleanor hadn't moved from the window. "Maybe you should eat a little something, Eleanor," I suggested, "just to keep your sugar up." "No!" she snapped. It was the first time she had ever raised her voice at me. "We eat together. That is the rule. We wait." 7 p.m. The phone rang. The sound shattered the atmosphere like a gunshot. Eleanor gasped, her hand flying to her chest. She looked at the antique telephone on the side table as if it were a holy relic. She waited for the second ring, composing herself, putting a smile on her face so they could hear it through the line. "Hello?" she answered, her voice trembling with excitement. "David, is that you? Are you close?" I watched from the doorway. I saw the light in her eyes flicker, then extinguish. Her shoulders slumped. The emerald silk seemed to lose its sheen. "Oh," she said. "Oh, I see. No, I understand. Business is business. The merger, yes. Of course, David, it's just... The dinner is ready. You're at the airport. Oh, you're not coming at all." There was a long silence. I could hear the tinny voice of a man on the other end, speaking fast, efficient, transactional. He wasn't apologizing. He was explaining. "There is a difference." "Next week," Eleanor asked, her voice barely a whisper. "But it's Christmas Eve, Davy. I made the pecan pie." Another pause. "Okay, yes. Send my love to Susan and the kids. Yes, goodbye." She hung up the phone. She didn't look at me. She stared at the fireplace. "David can't make it," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "Something with the merger. He's stuck in Chicago. He says he'll try to come in January." "I'm so sorry, Eleanor," I said, taking a step toward her. "It's fine," she interrupted, straightening her back. "Clara and Michael are still coming. Clara promised." "And Michael never misses the apple crumble." She was lying to herself. I could see it. She was stitching the wound shut before it could bleed, terrified that if she acknowledged the pain, she would fall apart. She turned back to the window. "Two is still a party. Two is still family." 8:10 p.m. The phone didn't ring this time. Instead, a notification pinged on Eleanor's iPad, which sat on the coffee table. She reached for it with shaking hands. She swiped the screen. It was Instagram. "Look," she whispered. I leaned over. It was a photo of Clara. She was in a ski lodge in Aspen, holding a glass of champagne, surrounded by beautiful people in designer winter gear. The caption read, "Escaping the holiday drama. Majestic mountains and zero stress. Best Christmas ever." Eleanor stared at the photo. She stared at her daughter's smile, a smile she had paid thousands of dollars in orthodontics for, a smile she had protected and nurtured. Clara wasn't working. Clara wasn't stuck in traffic. Clara had simply chosen a ski slope over her mother's table. "She told me she was working on the magazine," Eleanor said. The confusion in her voice was more painful than anger. "She lied." "Eleanor, she lied to me, Sarah." "Why would she lie? If she wanted to go skiing, she could have just said so. I would have understood. I always understand." A single tear rolled down her cheek, cutting through the powder on her face. It was the first crack in the dam. "Maybe Michael," she started, but she couldn't finish the sentence. She knew, we both knew. But hope is a cruel thing. It lingers long after logic has left the building. 9 p.m. The food was ruining. The turkey was dry. The sides were mush. The wine was warm. The house felt suffocatingly hot, the fire roaring in the grate, mocking the cold emptiness of the room. We sat in silence for another hour. At 9:45 p.m., the phone rang again. Michael. Eleanor didn't answer it immediately. She let it ring 4 times. When she picked it up, she didn't say hello. She just listened. I don't know what Michael said. I never will. But I saw Eleanor's face change. It didn't crumple. It hardened. It turned into stone. The sadness evaporated, replaced by a cold, terrifying clarity. She listened for 2 minutes, said, "I understand, Michael. Enjoy the party," and hung up. She stood up. The effort was immense, her joints popping, but she stood tall. She looked at the table set for 4. She looked at the macaroni ornament on the tree. She looked at the cold food. "They aren't coming," she stated. It wasn't a question. It was a verdict. "I can warm up a plate for you. I offered, desperate to fix something, anything. "We can eat together. I'm here, Eleanor, I'm here." She looked at me, and for a second I saw profound gratitude in her eyes, but it was quickly masked by that new, icy resolve. "No, Sarah, you are paid to be here." They were supposed to be here because they love me. That stung, but I knew she was right. "Clear the table," she ordered. Her voice was strong, stronger than I had heard it in years. "Take the food to the shelter downtown, all of it. The turkey, the pies, the wine, everything. But Eleanor, it's late and the snow." "Do it!" she commanded. "I don't want a scrap of this food in my house. I don't want the smell of it. Clear it all away. Leave the table set, but take the food." I didn't argue. I spent the next hour packing the feast into containers. I loaded my car. When I came back inside to check on her before leaving for the shelter, she was sitting at her writing desk in the corner of the library. She had a piece of heavy, cream-colored stationery in front of her. She was holding her husband's fountain pen. "Are you going to bed?" I asked. "Not yet," she said, not looking up. "I have some business to attend to. Go, Sarah. Deliver the food to people who are actually hungry." "I'll be back in an hour," I said. "Please, just rest." "I will rest soon," she promised. "I'm just waiting for midnight." "Why midnight?" She turned to me, and her eyes were dry, clear, and ancient. "Because until midnight, it is still Christmas. Until midnight, there is a statistical possibility, however microscopic, that one of them might burst through that door and apologize. I gave them life, Sarah. I owe them until the very last minute of this day." I left her there, sitting in the pool of light from the desk lamp, the pen hovering over the paper. The house was silent. The tree twinkled in the corner, a monument to a lie. I drove to the shelter. I dropped off the gourmet meal. The volunteers were shocked. I drove back. The roads were treacherous, delaying me. It was 12:30 a.m. when I finally pulled back into the driveway. The house was dark. The lights in the library were out. I unlocked the front door. "Eleanor?" I called out softly. Silence. I walked into the library. The desk lamp was off. The fireplace was just dying embers. I turned on the overhead light. Eleanor was sitting in the high-backed chair facing the window. Her head was tipped back. Her hands were resting on her lap. She looked peaceful. I ran to her. I touched her hand. It was already cooling. No pulse. She was gone. On the small table beside her, right next to a glass of water that hadn't been touched, was the note. I picked it up. I read it. And then I read it again. The world tilted on its axis. I looked at the clock. It was 12:45 a.m. She had waited. She had given them every single second of Christmas. And when the clock struck 12, she had picked up the pen. The note wasn't a suicide note. It wasn't a rambling letter of complaint. It was a legal instruction, handwritten, dated, and signed with a clarity that no lawyer could dispute. But it was the content of the instruction that made my blood run cold. It revealed a secret she had kept for 40 years, a secret that redefined who David, Clara, and Michael were, a secret that turned their absence tonight from a tragedy into a crime. I heard the rumble of an engine outside. Headlights swept across the library curtains. The first of them had arrived, probably Michael, realizing he needed money, or maybe David, guilt-tripping his way back. I clutched the note. They were about to walk into a funeral, but they didn't know they were also walking into an ambush. Eleanor was dead, but she had left a landmine in this room, and I was holding the trigger. The first car to tear through the silence of the night was a black Range Rover. It was David. He didn't park. He abandoned the vehicle at a crooked angle near the fountain, the headlights still cutting through the falling snow. I watched from the library shadows as he burst through the front door. He wasn't crying. He was panting, his breath pluming in the cold hallway air, his eyes scanning the room not for his mother, but for the situation. He saw me standing by the library doors, my hands clasped in front of my uniform, and for a split second looked relieved that staff was present to handle the mess. "Where is she?" he demanded, shaking the snow from his cashmere coat. No hello, no how did it happen. Just a demand for location. She is in the chair, David, I said softly. He walked past me, the smell of expensive cologne and stale airplane air trailing behind him. He entered the library, saw the small figure slumped in the high-backed chair, and stopped. He didn't rush to hold her hand. He didn't fall to his knees. He pulled out his phone. I'm calling the coroner and the lawyer. Has anyone touched anything? I haven't moved her, I replied, my hand tightening around the note in my pocket. I wanted you to see her at peace. Peace, he scoffed, tapping furiously on his screen. This is a logistical nightmare. It's Christmas morning, Sarah. Do you know how much it costs to get a private transport on Christmas? Within an hour, the house was full, yet completely empty of warmth. Clara arrived next, smelling of wine and performative grief. She threw herself onto the sofa, not near the body, but near the center of the room, and began to weep loudly, checking her reflection in the hallway mirror between sobs. I knew I should have come, she wailed, though her eyes remained dry. I felt it. I had a spiritual premonition in Aspen. Michael arrived last. He looked disheveled, his eyes red-rimmed, likely from substances rather than sorrow. He walked straight to the liquor cabinet, poured a scotch, and downed it before looking at his mother. Well, he muttered, wiping his mouth. She had a good run. 82 is decent. They were a masterclass in narcissism. They moved around the library, avoiding the body as if death were contagious. They spoke about funeral arrangements, press releases, and asset freezes. They treated me like a vending machine, barking orders for coffee, for water, for brandy. I served them. I moved silently through the room, pouring drinks and clearing coasters, observing them. I was the ghost in the machine. They didn't know that the real power in the room wasn't in the safe or the bank accounts. It was in the pocket of my apron. At 3 a.m., the family lawyer, Mr. Henderson, arrived. He was a stoic man who had served the Blackwood family for 30 years. He looked tired. He looked at the children with a mixture of pity and disdain. We need to read the will immediately, David said, pacing the room. I have assets tied up in the merger that depend on my liquidity. I need to know the probate timeline. David, your mother hasn't even been moved yet, Mr. Henderson said, his voice grave. She's gone, Arthur, David snapped, using the lawyer's first name with zero respect. She doesn't care about timelines anymore. We do. Read it. Mr. Henderson sighed and placed his briefcase on the heavy oak desk, the same desk where Eleanor had sat hours ago. The will is on file at my office, David, but I can give you the broad strokes. The estate is to be divided equally among the three of you. The house, the portfolio, the trust funds, it's standard. It hasn't been changed since your father died. The tension in the room snapped like a rubber band. You could physically see the relief wash over them. Shoulders dropped. Clara stopped, fake crying. Michael poured another drink, a smirk playing on his lips. They had won. The neglect, the missed calls, the ignored holidays, it hadn't cost them a dime. However, Mr. Henderson continued, Sarah called me when she found the body. She told me there was a document on the table. 3 heads turned toward me. Sarah? David's voice was sharp. What document? I stepped forward into the pool of light. My heart was hammering against my ribs, but my hands were steady. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the cream-colored stationery. She wrote this at midnight, I said, right before she died. Give it to me, David demanded, reaching out a hand. No, I said. The silence that followed was absolute. David looked stunned that the help had defied him. It is addressed to my children, I said. But since she appointed me the witness in the first line, I will read it, or I will hand it to Mr. Henderson. But you are not touching it, David. I handed the note to the lawyer. Mr. Henderson adjusted his glasses. He read the note silently first. His eyebrows shot up. He paled. He looked from the paper to the children. and then to the dead woman in the chair. "Read it," Clara whispered, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat. "It is dated December 25th, 12:01 a.m. It is legally binding as a holographic codicil, given the witnesses and the clear intent." He took a breath. "To my children, David, Clara, and Michael, if you are reading this, I am gone. And if you are reading this, it means you did not come. I waited. The table was set. The fire was lit. I gave you until the clock struck 12. I bargained with God. I said, if just one of them walks through the door, I will burn this letter. If just one of them calls and says I love you without asking for something, I will leave everything as it was. But the clock struck, and the driveway is empty." David rolled his eyes. "Okay, so she's guilty tripping us from the grave. Classic Eleanor. Does it change the money?" "David, shut up," Michael hissed. He was looking at the lawyer's shaking hands. Mr. Henderson continued reading, his voice gaining strength. "You believe you are waiting for your inheritance. You believe that the Blackwood fortune is your birthright, passed down from your father, the great industrialist Arthur Blackwood. You have spent your lives worshipping his memory and tolerating mine. You treated me as the caretaker of his money, the woman who signed the checks. But there is a secret I have kept for 40 years. A secret that I swore to take to my grave, to protect you. But tonight in this silence, I realize that protecting you from the truth only made you weak. It made you cruel, and I will not finance cruelty anymore." The room was freezing now. "Your father did not die a rich man. Arthur died bankrupt. He died with $40 million in debt, owed to banks, to loan sharks, and to investors he had defrauded. He was not a hero. He was a desperate man who took his own life to avoid prison. The police ruled it a heart attack because I paid the coroner. I did it for you. I couldn't let you grow up as the children of a fraud." "That's a lie," David whispered, his face draining of color. "Dad built this empire." "The money," Henderson read on, relentless, "came from me. It came from my family, the inheritance I received from my grandmother in France, which I never spoke of because Arthur was too proud to admit his wife was the solvent one. When he died, I used every penny of my own money to pay off his debts. I rebuilt the company from zero. I paid for your private schools. I paid for your weddings. I paid for your failures. I let you believe it was Father's money because I wanted you to be proud of your name." Clara was staring at the floor, her mouth open. Michael had put down his glass. "I thought that if I loved you enough, if I sacrificed my own legacy to save his, you would grow up to be kind people. I was wrong. You grew up to be people who leave their mother alone on Christmas. You loved the money, not the parents. And since the money was always mine, I have the right to decide where it ends." At 11:55 p.m. tonight, I logged into the trust accounts. You know I have the master key. I executed a full transfer of the liquid assets, the accounts, the stocks, the bonds, to the St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital and the Wounded Warrior Project. The transaction is complete. There is no money left. The accounts are empty. "She's bluffing!" David screamed, lunging for his phone again to check his banking app. "She's insane! She can't do that." "I can. And I did," the letter continued, "but I am not cruel. I would never leave my children homeless. I have left you the only thing that actually belonged to your father, the only asset that was truly his when he died, free of debt. I leave you the cabin in the woods in Montana. It has no electricity. It has no running water, but it has a roof. It is what your father actually owned. Everything else, this house, the cars, the jewelry, is being auctioned next week to pay the final taxes. You have 48 hours to vacate Blackwood Manor. I loved you with everything I had. I hope that one day when you are cold in that cabin, you will learn to warm each other. That is the only inheritance I have left to give. Mom, Mr. Henderson lowered the paper. The silence that followed was not the silence of grief. It was the silence of a nuclear winter. David was staring at his phone screen, frantically refreshing his banking app. "Zero," he whispered. "It says, access denied, insufficient funds. It's all gone." He looked up, his eyes wild. "She gave away $50 million in one click because we missed dinner." "She didn't do it because you missed dinner, David," I said, my voice cutting through the panic. "She did it because you missed her." Clara screamed. It was a primal, ugly sound. She grabbed a vase from the mantelpiece, a Ming vase worth $20,000, and hurled it against the wall. It shattered into a million pieces. "I have a mortgage," she shrieked. "I have creditors. I can't live in a cabin. I'm a curator." Michael started laughing. It was a low, manic laugh. He slumped into the armchair opposite his dead mother. "She did it," he giggled, tears streaming down his face. "The old girl finally did it. She played the long game. We're broke. We are actually broke." "We can sue," David stammered, sweating profusely. "Undue influence. She was senile. Sarah, you drugged her. You made her do this." He advanced on me, his fists clenched. "You poisoned her mind. You wanted this." I didn't flinch. "I didn't make her do anything, David. I begged her to go to bed. I begged her to eat. She waited for you. She watched the driveway until her eyes hurt. All she wanted was your time. You gave her nothing, so she left you nothing." "Get out," David roared. "Get out of my house." "It's not your house," Mr. Henderson interjected calmly. "Technically, the house now belongs to the estate executors for liquidation. And since Eleanor named Sarah as the executor of the estate to oversee the donation," the three of them froze. "She put the maid in charge," Clara gasped. "Sarah is the executor," Henderson confirmed. "Which means Sarah decides who stays on the property tonight, and Sarah decides when the auctioneers come in." They looked at me. For the first time in their lives, they actually looked at me. They saw the woman who had wiped their mother's chin, who had held her hand during the heart attacks, who had cooked the Christmas dinner they threw away. They saw the power shift. I looked at David, red-faced and trembling. I looked at Clara, mascara running down her face. I looked at Michael, broken and laughing. "You don't have to leave tonight," I said quietly. "It's snowing, and I wouldn't turn anyone out in the cold. That's the difference between us." I walked over to the fireplace and picked up the poker. I stirred the dying embers, coaxing a final flame from the wood. "But you will sleep in the guest rooms," I said, not looking back at them. "And in the morning you will pack only what you came with. The jewelry stays, the art stays, the memories stay. You didn't want them when she was alive. You don't get them now that she's dead." I walked over to Eleanor's body. I gently fixed the hem of her emerald dress. I touched her cold cheek. "Thank you, Eleanor," I whispered. "For the lesson." I turned to leave the room. "Wait," Michael said. His laughter had died. He looked sober now. "What was in the box?" "What box?" I asked. "The note," Michael said, pointing to the lawyer's hand. "At the bottom, there was a P.S. I saw it." "Mr." Henderson lifted the paper again. "Ah, yes, there is a postscript." He adjusted his glasses. "P.S. Sarah, look under the tree, the small red box tucked behind the angel. I told you I wasn't going to die broke, and I told you that family is who stays, not who shares blood." All eyes turned to the Christmas tree in the corner, tucked deep within the branches, hidden behind the angel Clara had stolen 20 years ago, was a small velvet red box. David lunged for it. "Don't!" I shouted. "It's mine," David yelled, grabbing the box. "She was my mother. Anything in this house is family property." He tore the box open. He expected diamonds. He expected a key to a secret Swiss account. He expected salvation. He ripped the lid off and stared inside. His face fell. He tipped the box upside down. A single rusted iron key fell into his palm. Attached to it was a tag that read, "Montana Cabin." David threw the key across the room in disgust. "Garbage! It's just the key to the shack." But I saw something else fall out of the box, a piece of folded paper that had been tucked under the velvet lining. David hadn't seen it in his rage. It fluttered to the floor, landing near my feet. I bent down and picked it up. "What is that?" Clara asked sharply. I unfolded the paper. It wasn't a note. It was a check, a cashier's check. I looked at the amount. I had to blink to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. "What is it?" Michael asked, stepping closer. I looked up at them. Tears finally filled my eyes, not for the money, but for the woman who had seen me when no one else did. "It's her life insurance policy," I said, my voice shaking. "The one policy that wasn't part of the estate, the one she paid into personally for 50 years. "How much?" David demanded. "That's ours. Life insurance goes to next of kin." "Not if a beneficiary is named," Mr. Henderson said smoothly. "Who is the beneficiary, Sarah?" I turned the check around so they could see. "Pay to the order of Sarah Miller. Amount $2 million. "She knew," I whispered. "She knew you would come for the will. She knew you would fight over the scraps. So she bypassed you completely." The silence returned, but this time it was heavy with a final crushing defeat. They had lost the millions, they had lost the house, and now they had lost the final payout to the help. David looked at me, then at his mother's body. For the first time he looked small. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the terrified realization that he was just a man in a snowy driveway with nothing but a return ticket to a life he couldn't afford anymore. The grandfather clock in the hall struck 4 a.m. The long night was over. The reckoning had begun. The sun rose on Christmas morning with a blinding, indifferent brilliance. It didn't care that the Blackwood dynasty had crumbled overnight. It just shone off the snowdrifts, turning the world into a glittering expanse of white diamonds. Inside the house, the air was stale, heavy with the scent of dried pine needles and burnt bridges. David, Clara, and Michael left at 8 a.m. They didn't eat breakfast. They didn't say goodbye to me. They walked out to their cars like refugees from a war they had started themselves. I watched them from the window, the same window Eleanor had kept vigil at for so many years. David's Range Rover struggled for traction in the ice, spinning its wheels in a high-pitched whine before finally gripping the road. It was a fitting metaphor for his life. A lot of noise, a lot of power, but no grip on reality. They took nothing but their coats. I had enforced Eleanor's rule. Clara had tried to slip a silver picture frame into her bag, a photo of herself, ironically, but I had gently, firmly taken it from her hand. "The estate is frozen, Clara," I had said. "Everything is catalogued." She had looked at me with hatred, but beneath the hatred was fear. For the first time, she was walking out into a world where her last name didn't open doors, it only opened debts. The next 3 months were a blur of bureaucracy and strangers. The auction of the Blackwood estate was the social event of the season. People came from 3 counties away, not to buy furniture, but to buy a piece of the scandal. They walked through the rooms wearing their muddy boots, touching Eleanor's curtains, sitting on her sofas, laughing loudly in the library where she had died. It was painful to watch. It felt like a second violation. I stood in the corner of the auction hall, watching the gavel bang down again and again. Sold, sold, sold. The dining table where she had set 4 places. Sold to a bed and breakfast owner for a fraction of its value. The grandfather clock that had counted down her final minutes. Sold to an antique dealer who complained about the scratching sound it made. Mr. Henderson handled the liquidation. The proceeds, millions of dollars, were wired to St. Jude's and the Wounded Warrior Project exactly as Eleanor had commanded. I received a letter from the hospital director. He said the donation would build a new wing for pediatric cancer research. He called Eleanor a saint. I smiled when I read that. She wasn't a saint. She was a mother who had learned the hardest lesson of all. Sometimes you have to break your children's hearts to save their souls. As for me, the $2 million sat in my account for 6 months. I didn't touch it. I was terrified of it. It felt like blood money. I went back to my small apartment in the city. I continued to work shifts at the agency, caring for other elderly people, listening to other silences in other large houses. But I couldn't shake the memory of that Christmas Eve. I couldn't forget the feeling of that empty table. 1 year later, on a Tuesday afternoon, I walked into a real estate office. I didn't buy a mansion. I bought a large, rambling farmhouse on the outskirts of town. It had a wraparound porch, a view of the hills, and a kitchen big enough to feed an army. I renovated it. I filled it with comfortable chairs, warm blankets, and the smell of baking bread. I named it the Eleanor House. It isn't a nursing home. It's a community. It's a home for elderly people who have no family, or whose families have forgotten them. I use the interest from the insurance money to subsidize the costs. We have huge Christmas dinners. We have music. And most importantly, we have a rule. No one eats alone. Ever. Every Christmas Eve, I set a place at the head of the table. I put a single emerald green napkin there. It's my quiet nod to her. I like to think she's sitting there, finally seeing a table full of people who are there not for the inheritance, but for the company. I often wondered about David, Clara, and Michael. I assumed they had lawyered up, that they were fighting the will, that they were clawing their way back into high society. But then, last week, I received a package. It was postmarked from Montana. The handwriting on the envelope was rough, jagged, as if written by a hand, stiff from cold or hard labor. It was from Michael. I opened it. Inside there was no request for money, no legal threats, just a letter and a photograph. The photograph showed the three of them standing in front of the cabin. It was a rugged, unpainted shack with snow piled up to the roof. They looked different. David had a beard, grey and unkempt. He was wearing a flannel shirt that looked 2 sizes too big. Clara wasn't wearing makeup. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and she was holding an axe. Michael looked thinner, tired, but his eyes were clear. They didn't look happy. They looked exhausted. But they were standing close together. Their shoulders were touching. I read the letter. Dear Sarah, it's been a year. I suppose you're wondering if we froze to death. We almost did. The first month was hell. The generator broke on day 3. David tried to fix it and nearly blew us up. We had to chop wood to keep from freezing. Do you know that David, the man who couldn't change a light bulb, now knows how to fell a pine tree? He had to learn. We all did. We fought. God, we fought. Clara screamed until her voice gave out. David tried to walk to the nearest town in a blizzard, and we had to drag him back. We hated Mom. We hated you. We hated the world. But then, the silence set in. There's no Wi-Fi here, no cell service unless you hike 3 miles up the ridge, no audience, no investors, just us. We ran out of money in March, real money. We had to work. David got a job at the general store stocking shelves. Clara waits tables at the diner on the highway. I fix trucks. It's humorous, isn't it? The visionary is now a mechanic. But something happened last night. It was snowing. We were sitting around the wood stove because it's the only source of heat. We were eating stew that Clara made. It wasn't great, but it was hot. And for the first time in 40 years, we talked. Not about stocks, not about galas. We talked about when we were kids. We talked about the macaroni ornaments. David cried. He admitted he hated his job in Chicago. He admitted he was drowning in debt before Mom died. He said this cabin, this freezing hellhole, was the first place he slept through the night in a decade. We aren't fixed, Sarah. We are still broken. We are poor. We are tired. But we are, for the first time, actually a family. We rely on each other to survive. If I don't fix the roof, Clara freezes. If David doesn't chop the wood, we can't cook. We need each other. Mom was right. She left us the only thing that belonged to Dad, the struggle. And in the struggle we found him, and we found her. I don't expect you to forgive us. We don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know that the lesson landed. The inheritance wasn't the cabin. The inheritance was the cold. It woke us up. Merry Christmas, Sarah. Michael. I folded the letter. I looked out the window of the Eleanor house. The snow was falling again, soft and forgiving. I thought about Eleanor writing that note at midnight. I thought about the pain it must have caused her to cut them off. It was the ultimate act of love. She had to destroy their lives to save them. She had to take away the cushion so they could feel the floor. People think that legacy is about what you leave for people, money, houses, jewelry. But Eleanor taught me that true legacy is what you leave in people. She left a mark on me that built a home for the lonely, and she left a mark on her children that turned them into human beings. I walked to the fireplace and placed Michael's letter on the mantelpiece, right next to the photo of Eleanor in her emerald dress. "They're okay, Eleanor," I whispered to the empty room. "They're finally okay." Outside, the church bells began to ring. It was midnight. Christmas had come again, but this time no one was waiting alone. We spend our lives trying to build fortunes to leave to our children, thinking that comfort is the greatest gift. But sometimes comfort is a cage. The greatest inheritance you can give your family is not a check that clears, but the character to survive when the check bounces. Family isn't defined by who sits at your table when the feast is served. It's defined by who stays to wash the dishes when the food is gone. Eleanor died with a broken heart so her children could finally learn how to use theirs. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to reach out to the people you love. Don't wait for the holiday. Don't wait for the right time. Pick up the phone. Make the visit. Because the only thing more painful than an empty chair is the regret of knowing you could have filled it. If you believe that family is about presence, not presence, share this story. And stay with us on the Triumph Stories for more truths that need to be told.